Okay, today we're going to talk about Trump having known the dangers of coronavirus and opting to downplay it to the American people, as well as a bombshell whistleblower complaint against the Trump administration, and my interview with the chairwoman of the House Oversight Committee in charge of the investigation against Louis DeJoy, who's now accused of committing campaign finance violations, and whether he could be impeached as Postmaster General. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're listening to No Lie. So the top story of this week, Trump knowingly downplayed coronavirus. And I know this might not feel like news because we all knew he was downplaying coronavirus when a deadly contagion was sweeping across the country and Trump was still saying, like a miracle, it will disappear. I don't know about you, but that was just one little clue I picked up on that told me, hey, this guy might just be downplaying the threat of a horrible pandemic. But because we have the most ham-handed president in American history, he basically made sure we'd all know just how willing he was to overtly lie. So Trump sat down for 18 separate interviews with Washington Post executive editor Bob Woodward, which was apparently the bright idea of Jared Kushner. Someone pitched this idea to Jared Kushner that Bob Woodward, who was already famous for taking down a corrupt Republican president, would like to sit down with Donald Trump, another corrupt Republican president, not for one, not for two, but 18 separate interviews. And Jared Kushner was like, yes. That's the judgment we're working with in the White House, by the way. I don't know about you, but that leaves me feeling plenty confident about the competence of this administration. So Trump sits down with Bob Woodward at the outset of this pandemic, and this is from their conversation on February 7th.
And so what was President Xi saying yesterday?
Well, we were talking mostly about the virus, and I think he's going to have it in good shape. But it's a very tricky situation.
Indeed,
it goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. The touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air, and that's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. People don't realize we lose 25,000, 30,000 people a year here. Who would ever think that, right?
I know. It's
pretty amazing. And then I say, well, is that the same thing? This is more deadly. This is 5 per. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff.
So not only did Trump know how easily transmissible it was, he even goes on to explain how much deadlier than the flu it was. He goes into specifics. He touches on the mortality rate of the flu versus coronavirus. And yet, publicly, the guy was still pretending it was the same thing as the flu. On March 9th, a month after this interview, Trump tweeted, "So last year, 37,000 Americans died from the common flu. It averages between 27,000 and 70,000 per year. Nothing is shut down. Life in the economy goes on." This was a full month after Trump already admitted that he knew coronavirus was deadlier than the flu, 5 times deadlier by his own admission. And yet he was still happily tweeting out misinformation because when it's not, an esteemed editor of the Washington Post, when it's just like the lowly plebes who take his tweets at face value, then sure, why not just tweet out outright lies? And it gets worse because in a subsequent interview with Bob Woodward on March 19th, Trump said this.
Now it's turning out it's not just old people, Bob. Just today and yesterday, some startling facts came out. It's not just older
exactly.
young people, to plenty of young people.
So
what's going on
give me a moment of talking to somebody, going through this with Fauci or somebody who kind of it caused a pivot in your mind, because it's clear just from what's on the public record that you went through a pivot on this to, oh my God, the gravity is almost inexplicable and unexplainable.
Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you,
sure, I want you to.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes,
because I don't want to create a panic.
I've always wanted to play it down. I still like playing it down. Meaning that Trump gave the entire game away. This wasn't just him, failing to contain the virus, which already unto itself is gross mismanagement, but that he was knowingly downplaying it with full awareness of the dangers. That while we were trying to contend with a virus that was highly transmissible, a virus that was multiple times more lethal than the flu, a virus that affects people of every age, Trump was pretending that none of that was the case. And not only that, he was actually contradicting those things with his own statements. And so because that precious time in the beginning was wasted, like literally wasted, with all of this Trump-inspired unnecessary confusion and chaos, we missed the window to contain it. Other countries didn't. South Korea, Germany, New Zealand, Canada, they didn't screw around. They didn't get mired in bullshit fights for the sake of fighting. They tested, they contact traced, they produced PPE, they imposed strict stay-at-home orders, they mandated masks. Done. No screeching about freedom or liberty or waving the flag around to show the rest of the world how great we are, how proud we are to be Americans while we're contracting a lethal virus and dying. They just got to work and they contained it. And now they're back open and their kids are back in school. Like on September 11th, Germany had 1 death. South Korea had 5, New Zealand had 0, Canada had 0, and the US had over 1,000, putting us just a few away from the 200,000 deaths mark. The difference here is leadership. When Trump says that he's doing a good job and that there was no way we could have done any better, all you have to do is look to literally any other country in the world. Like, imagine if this was an Olympic swim meet, only instead of 8 lanes, there are 180, and every country that dealt with coronavirus is participating. And we come in dead last, 180 out of 180. And the U.S. Coach Donald Trump, does an interview with Bob Costas and says, "You know, Bob, we swam perfectly. It would have been impossible to swim better than we swam. All the other coaches are asking me how we did it. They've all come up to me and they've told me they've never seen anything like it, and they wish they could have swam as well as us. I would rate what we did a 10 out of 10. That is what is happening here. Like, we don't have to pretend that this is a good result because every other country dealt with the same virus and they were all more successful. That means objectively, what happened here in the United States is not a good result. And so what followed these recordings being released was, the predictable stream of Trump mouthpieces explaining that he was totally right to do this, that he has some presidential duty to feed the American people misinformation because he didn't want to cause any panic. And I just have to say this. This is my absolute favorite excuse. That Donald Trump didn't want to cause panic. Right. So, and bear with me here, we're supposed to believe that the guy who's been shrieking about a hostile Antifa takeover where migrant caravans sneak into the country to rape the women and sell drugs to the kids, and our borders are eliminated and people are being locked inside their homes and babies are being indiscriminately executed after the mothers give birth and windmills are giving everyone cancer. We're supposed to believe that guy, Donald Trump, is trying to make sure that we don't panic? Are you kidding me? The guy fomented literal protests against stay-at-home orders with tweets to liberate Michigan and Minnesota and Virginia. Yeah, if there's one thing Donald Trump is known for, it's instilling a sense of gentle calm. You can't listen to Trump speak without serenity washing over you. Yeah. I want to touch on one more thing, and that's Bob Woodward's culpability here. So some of the dialogue has centered around whether Woodward had a responsibility to release these recordings in February when Trump admitted to downplaying it. Maybe Trump would have abandoned this whole bullshit strategy to downplay the virus, but instead, Woodward held on to these recordings because clearly he's using them to gin up interest for his book. And I think 2 things can be true here. First, yes, this was opportunistic by Bob Woodward, because there does exist the possibility that if Trump's denialism was exposed for the scam that it was earlier, maybe he would have pivoted to, acknowledging the danger of this pandemic for starters. But the second thing here is that it would not have made a difference. And here's why I say that. Just about everyone with a pulse was already accusing Trump of downplaying it. Epidemiologists and public health experts and politicians and activists and the rest of the world were all saying, hey, this thing is serious. People are dying. It's highly transmissible. You need to shut it down. And still Trump did nothing. So please, let's not kid ourselves into thinking that a recording was ever going to shame Donald Trump into altering his strategy. And consider the fact, too, that even now, after those recordings have been released, He's still congregating people together at rallies. He's still refusing to wear masks. He's still demanding that schools be reopened. It's happening right in front of us. He's proving that it doesn't matter when those Woodward recordings came out. He was never going to change. He proved that he was never going to be shamed into doing the right thing, even if recordings of his own words showing how full of shit he is undermine him. So is Woodward an opportunist? Yes. Would anything have changed if he released those recordings earlier? No. And I think that's the point here, right? Like, the point is that nothing is going to make Trump change. Nothing is going to alter his behavior. Even being exposed as a fraud, using his own words, even 200,000 dead Americans, even 8.5% unemployment, even 11 million Americans out of work, he's going to continue pretending this thing doesn't exist. He'll continue with the rallies, with the demands that schools and businesses and restaurants reopen. It wouldn't matter if there were 200,000 deaths or 2 million deaths, because he doesn't care whether people live or die. So look, I don't care whether you normally vote Democrat or Republican. I don't care what your normal litmus test issue is. If you want this virus to go away, then you have only one option on the ballot in November. Trump has made that abundantly clear. Next, I want to touch on a whistleblower complaint that was sent to the House Intel Committee. You might remember whistleblower complaints in that Trump's impeachment was launched from one. So the whistleblower here is the former Office of Intelligence and Analysis Acting Undersecretary Brian Murphy, and it outlines a number of issues, all of which are centered on the overarching theme of changing intelligence to validate Trump's rhetoric. So the complaint alleges that senior White House and DHS officials modified intelligence assessments to match Trump's rhetoric against Antifa while minimizing the threat posed by objectively more dangerous white supremacists. It alleged that then DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen inflated the number of suspected terrorist crossings at the southern border during her testimony to Congress to justify the construction of the border wall, despite being briefed by the whistleblower himself that those numbers weren't accurate. It alleges that DHS lied about levels of violence in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador so that those places would seem like safe destinations to send migrants to as part of Trump's immigration policy. And finally, Murphy details how he was ordered to stop providing intelligence reports on Russian election interference and to start reporting on activities pertaining to Iran and China. And that last point is the point that I want to focus on. The whistleblower complaint says that he was, quote, instructed to cease providing intelligence assessments on the threat of Russian interference in the United States and instead start reporting on interference activities by China and Iran. These instructions specifically originated from White House National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Mr. Murphy informed acting DHS Secretary Mr. Wolf that he would not comply with those instructions, as doing so would put the country in substantial and specific danger, end quote. It goes on to say that Murphy was told on July 8th, 2020, that, quote, the intelligence notification should be held because it made the president look bad. Mr. Murphy objected, stating that it was improper to hold a vetted intelligence product for reasons of political embarrassment, and as a result, he was excluded from future meetings. And that's corroborated by the fact that administration officials have decided 2 months before an election to stop offering in-person briefings on Russian election meddling efforts, opting instead to only offer written briefings. But here's the thing. If this whistleblower complaint is valid, then those written briefings aren't reliable. They're being altered to fit Trump's narrative. And by the way, that's not to say that China and Iran's activities aren't harmful, and they very well may be, but that's not why they're being highlighted. They're being highlighted because Trump has unilaterally decided to paint Biden as being pro-China and pro-Iran, and so because he only knows how to project, he's trying to shoehorn in this narrative that there's massive election interference on Biden's behalf, when in reality, the entire world knows that Russia did and still is interfering on Trump's behalf. And their activities are far-reaching and well-documented and leagues more insidious. Like, purposefully downplaying the more serious threat posed by Russia isn't only preventing us from taking measures to keep this country safe from an active cybersecurity attack, but it's giving Putin tacit permission to keep doing it. And I don't think I have to explain why that's dangerous. And finally, think about the long-term danger to Americans that comes from prioritizing the president's personal political agenda over the actual national security of this country. It would effectively be a death knell for our intelligence community. It would mean that any countries aligned with the president of a specific party have carte blanche to target and attack American citizens. And that's what's happening in real time. So this is a whistleblower complaint that should be taken seriously, because, call me old-fashioned, but I guess I'm just of the mind that maybe we shouldn't pretend that major threats against Americans don't exist because we don't want Trump to throw a temper tantrum. So that's it for this episode. To listen to my interview with Carolyn Maloney, check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. Talk to you next week.